Hey everyone, welcome to FF in the Six podcast, episode 7. I'm your host, Anthony Bandu, and with us is our co-host, Johnny Shermer, on the show as well as always. So we're gonna get started and get on right into it, looking at our week 13 recap of starts and sits. We'll go over some of the injuries that happened on Sunday, and then we'll go into week 14 starts and sits as well. Johnny, how was your weekend?
It's pretty good. I tried to catch as many games as I could, and there were definitely a couple of wild ones. I'm not sure if how many you saw this weekend, but I know the Raiders and Jets was pretty crazy. I know there were a bunch of ejections in the Dolphins game, so that was pretty wild. Titans and Browns game was really good to watch. So there were a lot of good quality games this weekend. So I'm excited to talk about them.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. I was watching the, Falcons Saints. I watched a bit of the, Rams and Cardinals, saw a bit of the Washington football team and the Steelers, and even a bit of the Browns and Titans. A bunch of games I got to see, which I'm pretty happy about. Definitely enjoyed my weekend and for fantasy overall. Going to the playoffs is pretty exciting for those who made it. Let's go. Really happy for you guys out there. But we'll definitely dive right on into the week 13 recap that we have for our starts. Number one, the big one that we said, quarterback Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders at the New York Jets. Derek Carr was 28 of 47. He had 381 passing yards, threw for 3 TDs, 1 interception. He was sacked 3 times. He had 2 carries for 5 yards and 1 TD. He scored a total of 33.7 points. Big game for the Raiders quarterback in that last second TD to Henry Ruggs down the sideline there. Johnny, did you happen to catch that game?
I did, yeah, and I didn't catch all of it, but I did watch the end of it because I was kind of surprised that the Jets were winning that late in the game, and then I ended up turning it off because I thought there was like what a minute something left, so I didn't think the Raiders were going to get it again, and then I saw that they won, so I was like, what the heck happened? But I don't know what the Jets were thinking. Obviously, they're tanking pretty hard if they have like one safety on a Hail Mary play. But yeah, that was pretty crazy. So that was good for Carr.
Yeah, it was really good for him. And I actually saw a stat by Pro Football Focus, them saying like, for throughout the game, Derek Carr was 0 for 5 against the blitz, and the D coordinator probably called that just to like kind of end the game for him if he was doing that bad against the blitz for the whole game. Probably the D coordinator thought, you know what, why not hit him with the blitz one more time to seal it, cover zero, so that the corner had no help over the top, and just very bad situation overall to have your, undrafted, uh, you know, free agent corner against the first round pick Henry Ruggs. And that's kind of what happens. Helped out some fantasy football owners definitely if they started Derek Carr and listened to us. So
Yeah, it was definitely risky though, just because of last week what happened with Carr. He only put up 1 point or in some cases negative points against the Falcons, but it's the Jets, so you're typically okay. So I'm glad to see that he did well. But moving on to my start, I believe that I said Taysom Hill at the Atlanta Falcons as expected, just like they did 2 or 3 weeks ago when they played the Falcons. Hill killed it again. He actually ended up passing a lot more this time, which was great to see. Passed for 232 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was sacked twice, but he did rush 14 times for 83 yards. He ended up scoring just over 24 points. But like I was saying, it was great to see him throw a lot more. I know Kamara got involved a little more. So being a Kamara owner in one of my leagues, I was really, really happy to see that. And he also rushed for a touchdown. But just seeing Taysom Hill kind of expand his play a little more, it was really good to see.
yeah, watching Taysom Hill slinging the ball around the field was pretty good to see, and definitely good for Saints fans overall to kind of see that the future is bright in New Orleans after Drew Brees does retire. Maybe it'll be the end of this year, but we'll have to see. And moving on to the wide receivers that we set to start, Alan Lazard of the Green Bay Packers versus Philadelphia Eagles. Definitely, we thought like this would be a great matchup, but unfortunately, Lazard was only targeted 4 times. He had 3 receptions for 50 yards, scored a total of 8 points. Definitely not the best outcome you want from a Green Bay Packers wide receiver, especially like Lazard, who had a pretty good game previously, and he was just trying to climb up the ladder for us in overall like rankings for wide receivers, just someone that's good and reliable. We'll have to see how things go on next week for him. And who was the next guy that we said for week 13?
Next guy we said was Jarvis Landry at the Tennessee Titans. He ended up doing really, really well. The whole Browns team actually did really well. Jarvis picked up 10 targets for 8 receptions, 62 yards, also had a touchdown. He did actually have a play where he passed to Baker Mayfield for 6 yards. So that was kind of funny, but he just ended up scoring just over 20 points. But again, it was really great to see Jarvis do well. He really hasn't had too many great games after OBJ went out. But again, it's really good to see that Browns team thriving right now.
Yeah, Jarvis Landry back to back good games. Hopefully he keeps it up. I have him in one of my fantasy leagues there, so hopefully he's keeping it up for the playoffs. Moving on to Raheem Mostert versus the Buffalo Bills. Not a great outcome for him. 9 attempts for 42 yards, one reception for 1 yard. Scored 5.3 points. Definitely a game that was out of his reach, just because of the score and everything. Then wanted to keep up with the Buffalo Bills and their offense. Definitely just out of his element there. And 9 attempts for 42 yards, not bad, but you just want to see more volume out of him, definitely to put up more production.
Yeah, that whole Niners offense is really risky if you end up starting any of them. I know Brandon Ayuk did really well. Debo Samuel is also a questionable one, but if you can stay away from any 49ers player, but again, it's super tough with that running back position right now just because of so many injuries. But yeah, if you have to start them, start them. If you can't, if you don't have to, then don't. But moving on to my start, I believe David Montgomery against the Detroit Lions. He ended up having a great game, second great game for him. 17 rushes, 72 yards, had 2 rushing touchdowns. Also had a couple of receptions in there for 39 yards. So that's really good to see him getting involved in the passing game, especially if you're in a PPR league. That really helps as well. But he just scored over 27 fantasy points. He has another great matchup next week that we'll get into. But again, it's really good to see him doing well just because he has struggled throughout the season, but it's good to see him having 2 solid games there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Good to see David Montgomery balling out so far this year and or continuing to ball out. The tight end that we said to start, Trey Burton at the Houston Texans. This one was definitely disappointing. Targeted 3 times. He had one reception for 11 yards, scored a total of 2.1 points. Not a good game for Mr. Trey Burton there. I know it's kind of a stretch sometimes with relying on the touchdowns and getting into the end zone. Hopefully, there's some bounce back there for him and the Colts for the tight end position. And our next guy, Johnny, you want to take care of that?
Yeah, for sure. Robert Tonyan on those Green Bay Packers against the Eagles. He ended up getting 1 touchdown, 4 receptions, 39 yards. So he did pretty well, just scored just under 14 points. But again, I think that's his second straight game now with the touchdown. So he's looking really, really good. Just that whole Packers offense in general is looking really good. So I'm excited to see them in the playoffs this year and see what they can do.
Yeah, and then our kicker that we said to start, Rodrigo Blankenship at the Houston Texans, kicked a field goal from 40 to 49 and scored 3 PATs. Scored a total of 7 points. Not bad for the Indianapolis Colts kicker there. The rookie kicker as well. Hopefully he's good to, progress more into doing bigger field goals than that. And we'll have to see how things move on from there.
Yeah, you can't ever really sit Rod. You always got to start him. So I think that's a very good call that we made. Next up, our defense, Raiders at Jets. Honestly, didn't do as well as I thought they would. They allowed 28 points, obviously, like we were mentioning earlier, but they got 3 sacks, 1 interception, 2 fumble recoveries, so that helped their point totals a little bit, but only ended up scoring at 6.5 points. So, like I said, definitely underwhelming. But whenever a team's playing the Jets, you got to start them no matter what.
Yeah, it's definitely always a good matchup. And then moving on to our Week 13 sit recap. Quarterback Matt Ryan versus New Orleans Saints. He was 19 of 39. He had 273 passing yards, 1 TD. He was sacked 3 times, and he fumbled once and lost that as well. So it was a turnover there on the stat sheet. Scored a total of 12.1 points. Not a good game for Matt Ryan at all against the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, it kind of showed that 3 weeks ago as well when they played. He didn't do so hot. They just couldn't really find the rhythm in that offense, and same thing this week. They just couldn't really find a groove to get into, and it showed. Matt Ryan really struggled against those Saints defense, and yeah, you can't really do much against that defense for sure. Next up, we said Jared Goff at the Arizona Cardinals. He did okay. He did better than I was thinking, but threw for 351 yards, 37 completions. Did have one passing touchdown as well as one rushing touchdown. Ended up scoring just over 23 points. So, like I said, definitely better than I thought he was going to do. But just, I think I said this last episode. He's been so inconsistent this season where it's so risky to play him safely, so you really don't know how he's gonna do.
Yeah, like I was surprised he had such a good game, and then you see Cam Akers had a pretty good game too. He had like 21 carries, so it was just good offensive game for the Rams against the Cardinals, and the Cardinals, you know, are just falling off a cliff. It seems like they were a team that I thought were gonna go to the playoffs and go so far, but now it looks like they're falling down back to earth. But moving on to our wide receiver that we said to sit. I hope guys went along with this call here. Terry McLaurin at the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was targeted 6 times. He had 2 receptions for 14 yards, scored a total of 3.4 points. This one I was pretty proud about with predicting this one for a sit, and it came true. Just because of seeing that game and Alex Smith kind of passing the ball out to other guys, getting guys more involved in the offense, and then they were able to win against the undefeated Steelers, are now defeated. So that was kind of a good sign to see, but unfortunate for Terry McLaurin fantasy owners that did start him in the lineup, but we did say to sit him. So
Exactly. We were dead on with that one. Next up, same game, Juju Smith-Schuster. Same thing with him. He had the targets there. Same with the receptions, but Washington held him to 28 yards. So that's really good to see for Washington's defense. We all know that they actually have really solid defense. It's just their offense is really inconsistent and not it hasn't been there this season. But yeah, going with Juju, he only scored 9.8 points with 7 receptions. So that's pretty wild. But again, it's really good to see Washington doing well. And that was a wild game. I'm not sure if you caught any of it, but good for Washington and their playoff push.
yeah, I saw a bit of that game for a bit, but I'll definitely try to finish off the rest of it just to see, some of the plays that were made throughout the game and some of the guys that were more involved. But the next guy that we set to sit, this one, running back Daryl Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. He had 3 rush attempts for 49 yards, one rushing TD, 2 receptions for 25 yards, scored a total of 15.4 points. That touchdown definitely came out of nowhere, and if you had taken that away, it's definitely a huge loss to his score points overall. So definitely a big shock there for Daryl Henderson. Getting in the end zone, and with Cam Akers having the overall bulk of the touches there against the Cardinals. If like I said, you take away that touchdown from Daryl Henderson, it's kind of a write off, and he would be more considered a sit option in this. But it is fantasy. It is what it is. Definitely unfortunate. 15.4 points. Hopefully, he was not on your bench.
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing. I think his touchdown was like a 38 yarder too, so that really helped his point total. And like you said, if you took that away, he'd probably be at like 6 points at most. So that definitely did not help. But moving on, same thing actually with this situation. J.D. McKissick, Antonio Gibson went down. I think the first drive of the game with a toe injury. So McKissick had a majority of the work in that backfield for the rest of the game. 10 receptions on 10 targets, 70 yards, only had 5 rushing attempts for 8 yards. But again, he's been used as that kind of receiver running back the whole season right now. And it's really showed. And he scored just over 17 points. And so I think if Gibson is out next week, which I'm sure he will be, I don't think they want to rush him back too soon. But if he is out, JD McKissick is definitely a solid start for you.
Yeah, that would be pretty good option with Antonio Gibson out. Maybe for some time, we'll have to see if he was your playoff running back. Definitely, maybe check the waiver wire to see if any of the backups are available. But moving on to our tight ends. Tight end Jared Cook of the New Orleans Saints at the Atlanta Falcons was targeted 5 times. He had 3 receptions for 28 yards, scored 1 TD of the Taysom Hill passing TDs, scored a total of 11.8 points. This one was definitely a big game for Jared Cook. You know, he was very unproductive the past few weeks, and then getting that touchdown catch definitely boosted his stats and his scored points. But in comparison to Darren Waller's 45 points, it's just kind of, then the 11.8 points isn't really helpful. But not everybody could put up the big numbers like Darren Waller himself.
Yeah, shout out Darren Waller for showing us a little bit of love on our Instagram page for liking one of those videos that we posted of him. We're a big fan, obviously, and we hope your success continues later this season into next season. But moving on to tight end Hunter Henry, terrible game, great sit option, only 1 reception, 2 targets, 5 yards. So ended up scoring just 1.5 points against a New England defense that is pretty solid. So again, it was a great sit option. And if you did end up sitting him, that is a great situation for you.
Yeah, definitely. It was a good option to sit. Bill Belichick really knows how to play well against the rookies, take away what they're good at, and just really expose them. Moving on to the defense, we set to sit the Chicago Bears versus the Detroit Lions. They allowed 34 points. They only got 2 sacks and 1 pick. They scored a total of 4.7 points. Not a good game for this Bears defense here. So yeah.
Yeah, we've kind of been on to that. Looks like the Bears have really been struggling. I know I'm going to get into it with a couple of my start options in a little bit, but they have been really struggling as of late. And Detroit really showed them that, which is really crazy considering it's Detroit. But 34 points Detroit had gotten, and Chicago only ended up getting 2 sacks, 1 interception. So it's really good to see that Detroit really thrived on Chicago's struggles as of late. But again, I'll get into it a little later on. But last sit option that we had, Will Lutz, the kicker for the New Orleans Saints, only scored 3 points with 3 PATs. So if you did have another kick option, it was really good to see him on the bench. But if you didn't, whatever. I know kickers are hard to come by as of this point in the season. But if you didn't end up sitting him, that was a good situation.
Yeah, definitely a good idea to sit him. Atlanta just kept allowing TDs to be scored on them, so not many field goal attempts made by Will Lutz, or not any field goal attempts at all because they're just scoring constantly in the end zone. But moving on to the injuries from Sunday, number one, quarterback Brandon Allen of the Cincinnati Bengals. He had a chest injury. Definitely keep an eye out for that if you have any of the receivers from the Cincinnati Bengals, or if you need a QB streaming option and you're very desperate, definitely keep an eye out for that. And then there was Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks. He had a concussion, but he was able to return to the game. Definitely keep an eye out for anything that comes up throughout his practices or things like that. And the same thing for Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans. He had a concussion. He has suffered multiple concussions in his career. But he was able to return to the game, so that was good news for him and good news for his fantasy owners as well.
Yeah, there weren't too many injuries that occurred, which is really good to see. Next up, we had Frank Gore. He left in the first quarter with a concussion, so that definitely does not help with the Jets' running back depth. Next up, Daryl Henderson had a slight knee injury. Again, we're not too sure how long these guys are going to be out for, if any time at all. Joshua Kelly left with an ankle injury. He did not return, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. Next up, obviously, like we said, Antonio Gibson did leave with a toe injury. He might be out for at least a week, possibly two. So we're going to have to wait and see. Last, Jay Sternberger, backup tight end on the Packers, left with a concussion. So again, not too many serious injuries, but a little bit just to go over.
Yeah, for sure. And now we'll just get into our week 14 starts. And we'll start off with the quarterback. But Johnny, do you want to take it from me here for this time? You could just go first with your quarterback that you have listed for the week 14 starts.
Yeah, let's do it. So, my first start here is Houston's Deshaun Watson at Chicago. Last week in Indianapolis, he put up 341 yards, 26 for 38, no touchdowns. He was sacked 5 times, but he did have 7 rushes for 38 yards, ended up scoring only 14.1 points. But Indianapolis's defense has been really solid this season. So I definitely do not blame Houston for that one. But like we were saying, Anthony, I know Chicago's defense has been really bad lately, and they've allowed 69 points. Very nice in the last 2 games. So I know with that loss against Indianapolis, Houston's going to come out very, very strong. I know Will Fuller's not in the lineup anymore, but I know Deshaun Watson, he's going to make it work. And again, Chicago has just been terrible with the pass defense as of late, and Watson's thrown 6 touchdowns in the last 3 games. So I think he's going to come out guns hot, and I think he's in for a solid week. I know the Texans do rank second in the league for most passing yards a game with 279. Chicago does allow, on average, around 240 passing yards a game, but it keeps dropping, obviously, as their struggles continue. But this will be Watson's first game against the Bears in his career. So we're going to have to see how he does in the colder weather.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how Deshaun Watson plays against this Bears defense for the first time of his career and going against, I'm pretty sure he has gone against Khalil Mack previously, so he kind of knows what to expect against him, being lined up against him. So it'll definitely be nice to see how Deshaun Watson does, and I'm pretty confident in his ability to, score some TDs against this defense and put up some big numbers. Now, moving on to the quarterback that I was saying to start for week 14 is Philip Rivers at the Las Vegas Raiders. In his game against the Houston Texans, he was 27 to 35. He had 285 passing yards, 2 TDs. He was sacked 3 times, and he had 2 rushes for -2 yards. Scored a total of 19.8 points. And the Raiders defense have given up the ninth most passing yards this year with 3,085 yards. They're ranked in the middle of the pack of 16th, with giving up 20 TDs on the season. So that's not bad, but it's not great. So I definitely could see Philip Rivers, with his hot streak that he's on, just keep putting it on them and getting the ball in the end zone. And seeing that the Jets offense was able to put up points against the Raiders, definitely gives me a lot more confidence that Rivers can definitely do the same. And like I was saying earlier, with the Rivers hot streak over the past 3 weeks, he's thrown 7 TDs and 2 interceptions, which are pretty good numbers. And Rivers has gone against the Raiders plenty of times in his career. He's thrown about 7,000 yards against them, and he has a total of 47 TDs on the Raiders team and 22 picks against them, or 22 interceptions against him. And even with Rivers needing foot surgery after the season ends, I'm like he continues to persevere through that injury and he just keeps playing really well. We saw it last week, like I said, against the Texans. So definitely not something I'm really worried about with Philip Rivers. He's definitely a smart player. He knows what he's doing on the field and controlling of the offense. So definitely a good start against this Raiders defense.
Yeah, I didn't realize actually how many TDs he had thrown against the Raiders. Obviously, he's been in the league for a little bit now, but his stats are really, really good. And like you said before, Raiders really struggled against the Jets. So, like you said, with Rivers' hot streak going right now, I'd expect him to keep it up. So he's definitely a safe start option for sure going into the quarterfinals for some people this week. So next up, we'll move on to our wide receivers. My start is going to be Green Bay's Alan Lazard at Detroit. Last week against Philly, he only ended up having 4 targets for 3 receptions and 50 yards, scored around 8 points, but he has hovered over that 5 target range ever since coming back from his injury. Going up against the Lions defense, obviously, we know they're not too strong. I know if Jeff Okudah's back from injury, he's going to most likely be on Devontae Adams most of the game. Green Bay they did play actually Detroit in week 2. Lazard had 3 receptions for 45 yards that game. Last season, Lazard played Detroit twice, I believe, had over 120 receiving yards plus a touchdown. So I think when it comes to Detroit, they do rank sixth worst when it comes to passing defense, averaging around 261 yards per game. So I know Rodgers is going to be trying to throw the ball as much as possible, but I know their run defense is quite terrible as well too. So I know Aaron Jones will definitely get more touches this game for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely a good idea to, start Alan Lazard going against Detroit. Very good matchup there for him. And my wide receiver to start is Sterling Shepard versus the Arizona Cardinals. Last week at Seattle, he was targeted 6 times. He had 1 reception for 22 yards, and he caught a conversion. He scored a total of 5.2 points. Colt McCoy really struggled to connect with Shepard. And although the status of Daniel Jones is looking pretty good from his hamstring injury, um, hopefully he comes back and that they're able to, have that connection that they've had in the previous weeks where Daniel Jones was getting Shepard involved in the offense. Over the past 3 games, Sterling Shepard has been targeted 20 times. He's caught 14 of those balls and for 133 yards, but 0 TDs. This Cardinals defense has given up 13 touchdowns to receivers, which is tied for fifth most in the league. Pretty good looking at that for Sterling Shepard. And, like I was saying with Daniel Jones potentially coming back and this defense struggling against the wide receivers, with the volume that Sterling Shepard does receive when Daniel Jones is in the lineup, he's definitely, or even when he's not, being targeted 6 times, he's definitely a reliable option for week 14. Someone that I will definitely want to set in my lineup. So look at that matchup against the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I really like both receivers on the Giants team of Shepard and Slayton. I know Daniel Jones tries to look for them as much as possible. So if he is coming back from injury, I think both of those guys are really good starts, obviously against the Cardinals. But moving on to our running back position here, I'm going to say Cam Akers. So we kind of mentioned a little bit before Daryl Henderson did have that knee injury. Not sure if he's going to be out for any time, but this is a Thursday night game. He did have a dude not practice tag on him yesterday, Monday, the December 7th. But that obviously could have just been for rest. I know he played quite a bit on Sunday. So yeah, they're going up against New England on Thursday night. Last week against Arizona, 21 rushing attempts, 72 yards, 1 touchdown. Did also have a reception in there for 22 yards. Ended up scoring just over 16 points. But again, like I was saying, he played a lot on Sunday. I think his snap count went up to around 61% versus last week. I think it was around 30%. So it's really looking like the Rams are starting to use him and seeing what he's capable of. But again, New England, they average around 118 rushing yards per game. So not great, not amazing, but right in the middle of the pack there. And I think Akers is really finally starting to prove himself that he is going to be that number one back in LA, hopefully next season. But Akers does have 2 rushing touchdowns in the past 2 games, usually used as a red zone threat on that goal line. But again, if Henderson's out, Brown's obviously not a great go to for the Rams. So I think if Henderson is out, it's definitely going to be a safe start for Akers.
Yeah, it's nice to see that they're using their second round rookie that they drafted and Cam Akers to be very productive on the offense. And seeing the 21 attempts was very good. Yeah, I think the injury that he did suffer that they were saying is a shoulder injury, but I think it was just mainly because of the bulk of the carries. His just wear and tear on the body a bit, and he just needs to rest up, and then he'll be good to go. But moving on to the running back that I was selecting for week 14 is David Montgomery versus the Houston Texans. We've kind of turned into big David Montgomery fans after him consistently scoring and doing pretty well. So he's going against the Texans and last week against the Detroit Lions. He had 17 rushes for 72 yards. He had 2 TDs and 4 receptions for 39 yards, scored a total of 27.1 points. Like we said earlier, very good numbers. And he's been, very outstanding ever since they came back from their bye week. And over the span of the 2 games, he's had 37 touches, 254 all-purpose yards, and 3 TDs. And a very good matchup against the Texans as they've given up 139 yards per average to opposing running backs, and they've given up 15 TDs on the ground as well. So definitely want to ride the hot hand and start Montgomery in your lineup for week 14.
I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Anthony. So in one of my leagues, I have Montgomery on the bench right now, but my three running backs,
Hmm.
Kamara, Chubb, and Carson. Carson's going up against the Jets.
Yep.
Chubb's going up against Baltimore Monday night. Kamara up against a tough Eagles defense. So do I sub out one of those for Montgomery or do I keep those three starting? What do you say?
Like you mean between Carson, Kamara, and
Carson,
Chubb?
Chubb, Kamara. Yeah.
I would want to say um bench Carson against the Jets.
Mm-hmm.
Just mainly because I feel like with Russell Wilson, he's probably just going to be slinging it like crazy. It's not really going to be a game necessarily where they're going to be wanting to run the ball just because of how poor the secondary is for the Jets. So I would think he would be the player that you would want to bench and want to start Montgomery over.
Okay, I might have to listen to you, and I don't know. I'm obviously like most of us, we're in the quarterfinals here, but big decisions lie ahead. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely think about your answer there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hopefully it works out for you.
Of course. All right, let's move on to tight end starts. First up, Noah Fant. Big fan of him. Obviously, we've talked about him a lot on the show so far this year. Last week on Sunday night, actually, against Kansas City, 7 targets, 4 receptions for 57 yards. Ended up scoring just under 10 points. Fant has picked up 14 targets, although in the last 3 games, 125 receiving yards with it. Panthers tight end coverage has been weak all season, so they are 10th worst, I believe, for points allowed to tight ends. And I know Drew Lock loves going to Noah Fant, great tight end. I know he's going to grow even more next season, so I'm excited to see him. But the Panthers allow just around 249 passing yards per game. I know Drew Lock doesn't throw the ball too much. I know he likes to keep it on the ground as well for his running backs, but against Carolina, their defense is okay. But with Fant having 7 targets against one of the best defenses in the league in Kansas City, I think it's going to be a safe bet that Drew Lock's going to do the same thing again this week. With the Panthers coverage, obviously not great on tight ends as it is on wide receivers. I think Fant is definitely going to be a safe start for you.
Yeah, and the option that I have for week 14 is Hayden Hurst of the Atlanta Falcons at the Los Angeles Chargers. Last week versus the New Orleans Saints, he was targeted 4 times. He had 1 reception for 9 yards, scored a total of 1.9 points. I know Hayden Hurst hasn't made a consistent impact on the Falcons offense since week 9 when he scored 13.2 points and has not scored a TD since week 6. And although now going against the Los Angeles Chargers in Week 14, it's definitely a good matchup because I think that the Chargers are tied for second in the league with allowing TDs to tight ends, total of 9 on the season, and Hayden Hurst is tied for the third most targets on the team right now with Julio Jones. So definitely seeing a lot of opportunities there. So I'm thinking with that and the Chargers, giving up that many TDs. It's definitely a good matchup for Hayden Hurst to find the end zone. So definitely give him a start in your lineup this week.
Yeah, like when I was watching that Saints Falcons game, I know he does get a lot of opportunity. And I know obviously with Julio, he's so inconsistent with his injuries. So if he happens to go down against the Chargers, I know Hurst and Ridley, obviously, they're going to be two really good options for Matt Ryan. So I think that's definitely a safe start. But last but not least, for our starts, moving on to defense, we were saying Tennessee at Jacksonville. So I know Clowney just went down with season ending surgery. I don't even really think he was doing too much, Anthony. I haven't really seen his name all that much this season on those Titans defense. But again, Jacksonville, probably one of the worst teams in the league. Obviously, I think they're 1-11, I want to say. But yeah, Tennessee, obviously, they're coming off of a big loss against Cleveland. They're trending downhill as of late, but I know against Jacksonville, they're going to try to do their best, obviously, to get back into the win column and do as best as they can.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm pretty sure with Clowney right now, he has a knee injury and he went into surgery, so he'll be done for the year. So it'll be interesting to see
Yeah.
where he goes for free agency and see if he can make an impact on another team's defense or if he stays within Tennessee. But moving on to the Week 14 sits, I'll take this one with the QB number one. Uh, my sit prediction would be Kyler Murray at the New York Giants. Last week against the Los Angeles Rams, he was 21 of 39. He had 173 passing yards, three TDs, one interception. He was sacked two times. He had five rushes for 15 yards, fumbled the ball twice and lost it once, so that was one turnover. Scored 16.77 points. Kyler Murray has been in a bit of a slump over the past 2 weeks. And going against this New York Giants defense, I could definitely see that continuing for this game. Kyler's primarily known for his ability to run the ball as he scurries for easy yardage and finding the open holes in the defense. And over the past 3 weeks, he's kind of failed to run the ball like he has earlier this season. And over those 3 weeks, Kyler has only run the ball a total 15 times for 61 yards and zero TDs. This Giants defense is also ranked number three against the defense for opposing QBs rushing the ball. They've only allowed 107 yards this season and one TD. And Kyler Murray's performance last year against the Giants, he was 14 to 21. He had 104 passing yards, 10 rushes for 28 yards. This defense personnel kind of remains the same. And seeing what they did against Russell Wilson, um, allowing him to only score 12.77 points, you definitely see, Kyler Murray being an option to bench this week.
Yeah, like you're saying earlier, they've been quite on a slump as of late. So it sucks to see Kyler doing so poorly. But going up against those Giants, like you just said, Russ really got shut down against them. And with Washington's big win against the Steelers, the Giants are neck and neck with that first place spot in their division. So I think for the rest of the season, the Giants and Washington are really gonna play for their lives and obviously trying to get that first playoff spot. So I think Kyler's definitely a safe sit for this week. But moving on to my sit, it's going to be Detroit's Matt Stafford against Green Bay. So last week against Chicago, like we said earlier, he did really, really well. 27 for 42, just over 400 yards with 402, three passing touchdowns, one interception, was sacked twice, but ended up scoring just under 28 points with 27.9. But like I just said, he had one of his better games of the year last week against Chicago. But those previous two games before that game, he only has 13 points locked up. So obviously, that's not what you want to see out of a quarterback. On the other hand, Green Bay's defense has obviously been lights out the past couple of weeks. We just saw that against Philly and previous week before that as well. The Lions do rank sixth worst to points given to opposing defenses, and obviously with an injury-prone team with the Lions right now, with Kenny Galladay out and DeAndre Swift, it's going to be tough for Detroit to put up points for sure. I think Green Bay does rank around 11th best for pass coverage, just averaging around 224 passing yards per game and 114 rushing. But like I said, with all those injuries, I know Stafford's not going to have too many options besides Jones Jr. and then TJ Hawkinson. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how Detroit switches it up. But I think Stafford's definitely safer on the bench this week.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy that I have the Green Bay Packers defense to start against the Detroit Lions there. And hopefully it's a good outcome for me. But moving on to the wide receivers that we said to bench. For me, I said to bench Devontae Parker of the Miami Dolphins versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Last week versus Cincinnati Bengals, he was only targeted 8 times. He had 4 receptions for 35 yards, scored a total of 7.5 fantasy points. And in a matchup where you'd expect to see Devontae Parker thrive, he didn't do much against the Bengals as he also got ejected in the fourth quarter. The Chiefs defense have only allowed 134 receptions and 1,622 yards to opposing wide receivers this season, as well as only 12 touchdowns as well. And Devontae Parker may get volume from targets, but you do want to see him make the most out of the opportunities he gets. And with this matchup against the Chiefs, I don't think that will happen. This Chiefs defense is very good. They got very good secondary personnel. With a rookie quarterback like Tua, it's just very, you know, uneasy in my opinion to just give him that starting spot there. So he's a sit option for me this week.
Yeah, I actually ended up sitting him earlier today before even looking at our notes. I put McKissick in his spot just in case of that Gibson injury. But obviously, going up against the Chiefs, that's going to be a tough one. Parker being their number one, they're going to be locked up on him mostly all game, I'd say. So it's definitely safe to keep him on the bench. Moving on to my receivers sit. I know Anthony, you kind of cringed at this one earlier, but it's going to be Buffalo's Stephon Diggs. And yesterday against San Fran, he did really well, obviously. 11 targets, 10 receptions for 92 yards, ended up scoring just over 19 points. But hear me out, Anthony. They're going up against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's pissed off to the core. They just lost against the Washington football team to go 11-1 now. Obviously, Diggs is that number one, but I know, like we were saying before we started recording, I believe Cole Beasley, he's going off right now. So he's going to be a great option for Josh Allen against the Steelers. I know Diggs is going to be locked up with their defense mostly all game, having one of the best, obviously, in the league so far this season. And Pittsburgh only allows around 199 passing yards on average per game, which is first in the league. Josh Allen loves to throw the ball, so it's really going to be an interesting game to watch for sure. Diggs is going to get the targets, obviously, probably around that same 9 to 10 range. But again, it's going to be really interesting to see how that Steelers D handles Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs receiving game.
Yeah, Cole Beasley is my guy. I got him in fantasy. I'm pretty happy with him. So if the ball just keeps going to him, I'm gonna be pretty happy instead of it going to Stephon Diggs. But moving on to our running backs to sit. I said Kareem Hunt versus the Baltimore Ravens, and last week at the Tennessee Titans. Hunt had 14 rushes for 33 yards. He had 3 receptions for 24 yards. Kareem Hunt has struggled to produce since Week 11 versus the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Ravens have only allowed like a total of 977 rush yards on the ground to opposing running backs, as well as only 3 TDs on the ground. Kareem Hunt is a reliable option in short down and distance situations. However, in his 2 games he has played against the Ravens, he's only put up 80 rush yards, 8 receptions for 42 yards, and 1 fumble. So he's definitely a guy that I would want to sit for this week just against the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, going up against that Ravens D is obviously going to be really tough. And I know ever since Chubb's come back from that injury in week 10, I believe, he's been used a lot, and Hunt has really seen that in his game. He hasn't been on the field as much as he was those first 4 weeks of the season before Chubb got injured, and obviously he was the starter between that time. But again, going up against that Ravens defense is obviously going to be really, really tough, and it's going to be interesting to see what Baker does and how he adjusts to their defense. Is he going to throw a little more, and are they going to use Chubb and Hunt a little more? Um, but it's definitely safe to say to keep Hunt on the bench. Obviously, since Chubb's back, he's been getting a lot of those touches. So it's definitely safe to keep him on the bench for week 14. But going on to my running back sit, it's going to be Houston's David Johnson at Chicago last week against Indianapolis. 10 attempts for only 44 yards. Did have a rushing touchdown in there for 10.4 fantasy points. I was bashing Chicago's defense earlier as of late, obviously. But obviously, I think their D line is one of the best in the league still. I know Johnson he's an average running back at best. So I know Chicago, I don't think it's going to struggle too much to stop him. I know Deshaun, he likes to scramble as well. So it's going to be tough for David Johnson to rack up those points. I know the Bears allow on average around 116 rushing yards per game, ranked 8th best for rushing touchdowns with only zero point 0.8 per game. So don't have confidence, I'm going to say, in David Johnson scoring one of those touchdowns that he had last week against the Colts. But again, it's definitely safe to keep him on the bench. Chicago's D, they're still strong, but I think they're definitely weak right now in the passing game. So I think Deshaun's definitely going to handle that for sure.
Yeah, definitely a good option there to sit. And could definitely see the game plan too being in Deshaun Watson's favor, just slinging the ball all over the field. So yeah, definitely a good idea there to sit David Johnson of the Texans. For tight ends that I said to sit for this matchup for this week, going into it, Tyler Higbee versus the New England Patriots. Last week versus the Arizona Cardinals, he was targeted 6 times. He had 4 receptions and 1 TD. Not sure how many yards he had, but Tyler Higbee has been inconsistent throughout this year. Looking at the past 4 weeks, Higbee has only been targeted 18 times, making 12 receptions for 109 yards and 1 touchdown. The Patriots defense has been locking down tight ends this year, as they've only allowed 47 receptions for 552 yards and 1 TD to opposing tight ends. And, even last week we did see two with Hunter Henry, him not even getting the ball at all. He was kind of irrelevant on the offense. And, Higbee is close to Jared Everett in like every stat offensively, except for TDs where Higbee had, his game where he had 3 TDs in the one game. So he has a total of four, and Everett has one. Uh, and Higby is also declining in the amount of targets that he's given. He's ranked fifth on the offense in targets and fifth in overall yards. And like I was saying, him and Gerald Everett are very close in every stat. So Gerald Everett is kind of pushing through to be in that starting role. And just Tyler Higby's on a decline, so he's a set option for me against the New England Patriots.
Yeah, that's definitely a safe option for sure. I know in one of my leagues, shout out the boys that always rip me for this one, but I ended up trading, I think, Travis Kelsey for Higby and Singletary. But oh my God, looking back at that right now, it kills me because Singletary doesn't do anything. Higby, like you said, he's been declining all season. So, especially with Gerald Everett in that tight end role as well, I think he's definitely a safe sit option for sure against those Patriots and their defense. But moving on to my tight end sit, it's going to be Green Bay's Rob Tonyan. And I know I was kind of gassing him up earlier. He's been doing really well. And I know I was bashing Detroit's defense earlier too. But I know with tight end coverage, Detroit remains very strong with that. I think they're around the fifth best, I want to say, for opposing tight end points so far this season. They did play in week 2, like I mentioned before. Tanya did end up getting 2 receptions and a touchdown. But since then, like I said, the Lions have been really lights out with tight end coverage. And I think obviously the Packers will use both Adams and Lazard a little more, plus Aaron Jones in the run game. So I think Tanyan's going to see a decrease in looks this week. So it's definitely safe to keep him on the bench.
Yeah, definitely good move there. Hopefully it works out for us and with our sits. But our defense, who are you saying to sit this week for defense, Johnny?
I'm going to say Buffalo against those Steelers. Like I mentioned earlier, Steelers are pissed off. They just lost and their undefeated record. So they're now 11-1. But it's going to be a very high scoring game, I believe, with Buffalo and Pittsburgh. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see. Josh Allen's going to do obviously everything he can against those Steelers defense. And obviously the Pittsburgh offense is going to really have to work on what they can improve on after last week's game. But like I said, it's definitely going to be a high scoring game. So I don't see Buffalo's defense putting up many points.
Hey, that's awesome, man. And this has been a pretty good episode, episode 7 of the podcast. Thank you everybody for listening and giving us a follow and tweeting at us on our Twitter and everything. You could definitely give us a follow and download our podcast. We're FF in the 6 on all social platforms. You could definitely give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, uh, you know, YouTube, and download our podcast on Spotify. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Hopefully, you have a good week and you're able to make the playoffs. Thank you and have a great week 14.